Okay, thank you everybody for coming. I want to say a few more thanks. I want to say a few more thanks also for hosting me here for the last 2 weeks. I really enjoyed it. It's been really thrilling to be part of the team, a super talented team, enthusiastic team. So I really enjoyed every day, which has been fantastic. And I know I've met many of you in one-to-one meetings, and each of those meetings has been really inspiring. So I've enjoyed being the first ATT10 visiting fellow. So thanks. Okay, so a little bit of background about me and what I'm going to talk about today. We're about 14 minutes or so to talk. And so I'm going to try and work through the slides reasonably quickly. I have time for conversation and questions at the end, which I look forward to. So just a first key point, as I said, I'm a social anthropologist by training. In a previous career, I worked in education, so I've tried to bring together education and anthropology. And these days I specialize in small-scale micro-analysis of educational assessment. That's really what I've been focusing on for the last few years. In this talk, I'm going to look at what anthropological perspectives can bring to micro-analysis and assessment, particularly micro-analysis in what people, I guess, call next-generation assessment, multimodal assessment, etc. And my talk is in 3 parts. I'm going to just set the scene a little bit at first, then I'm going to present some data, and then I'm going to draw some conclusions and some implications for how this is going to work and go forward. Okay, so the first point on this slide here emphasizes what anthropology brings to, as a discipline, brings to the study of assessment. And apart from sort of micro-analysis, which I'll describe shortly, it brings what Levi-Strauss called the view from afar. That includes things like the relativism which is associated with cross-cultural studies. So studying culture and society in different places, studying, for example, educational practices, assessment practices across different cultures and contexts. It introduces an element of relativism into the analysis and what anthropologists would call distancing. So to see what we do from the perspective of other practices and other cultures. Another key point that it brings, I think, again coming from anthropology, is the emphasis on critical reflexivity. From the anthropological perspective, what that means is anthropologists reflecting critically on, in part, their positionality as researchers. So their awareness that producing knowledge about others is also about having power over others to some extent. So there are certain responsibilities that go with representing others, producing data about others. And for anthropologists, that whole area of biopower and representation and measurement is something that you feel quite self-critically, particularly when you look at some of the histories of even the social Darwinist type of anthropology and Victorian anthropology, sort of racist theories and so on that would come in previous generations in Victorian anthropology. And one of the things that modern anthropology did is quickly try to distance itself from that kind of history, but taking with them the awareness that, with the projects of representation of others comes a lot of responsibility. And that feeds into my interest in validity, validation, and processing, because I think we have similar kind of responsibilities in representing others and capturing data about others and framing that data to think about how valid and appropriate those representations are and the kind of consequences they might have for the societies that we're studying. My particular interest, as I say, is in microanalysis. And I'm going to talk a little bit about microanalysis and how it relates to multimodal assessment. Microanalysis, for me, comes from the work of Erwin Goffman, and he looks at Goffman's work very much sort of championed the analysis of face-to-face, small-scale encounters embedded in particular social situations. And for me, we can apply that, drag and drop it to assessment and learning type of situations. So what's going on in those situations? How can we understand them? And I'm going to talk a little bit about felicity conditions in the next slide. So what's going on in face-to-face encounters? Microanalysis also relates to multimodality. And I think the key thing that I would note in sort of working together here in the last couple of weeks is that the field is moving very rapidly from into a period of innovation and improvisation. And that has really big consequences for how we understand what we do and how we understand the issues around validity. And so the title of my talk, The Process of Validity from Revolution to Routine, is trying to problematize that. I don't have all this, I'm posing the questions, I don't have all the answers, but I think I'm beginning to understand what some of the answers might involve. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, so I'm just going to skip through some of these points. I think that some of them will be familiar to you, but I just want to pick out one or two points. When we're talking about validity, what are we talking about? Obviously, it's a huge area, it's much debated, it's a huge literature, and I'm not going to go through that literature today. But some of the key themes that we might look at when we're talking about validity are fairness and equity. So, traditionally, is the issues around exploring test bias, for example, and what those things might involve. We're looking at the reliability of assessments, issues around fidelity and precision. Are we able to assess across groups, across situations, across cultures and across times in a reliable way, which is valid in order to draw the conclusions that we want to draw. We're looking at fit, so how well do our constructs and models fit with what we're doing? And finally, we're looking at accountability and consequences. So as I'll talk about, validation practices involve internal processes that we would do in our day-to-day work, but they also involve accountability to others. And I think when we look at the more routine established procedures for validation, they have two functions. One is for people internally to check whether their assessments are performing as they should, but also that accountability to others, to say to the public, to say to governments, to people who use our tests, we know this works, this is our evidence for why it works, and to be accountable in that kind of way. And that's particularly challenging in this particular period that assessment's going through, because a lot of the innovation that we're doing involves improvisation and rapid change, and it doesn't always match up with those established validation practices. So that's a challenge. Okay. So I want to start. I don't know why that's there, but there's a mark on the screen. Maybe it'll go away. Okay, so I'm going to start with this slide, which I mentioned to Sad yesterday for dinner. He said it's not my best work, but I think it's really good work. I think it's really good work, and I think it's really important, and let me say why. Here Sad's making some claims, I think, important claims about this point about the fidelity of data. And what I want to do is I want to link Sad's claims about the fidelity of data with some of the wider work on microanalysis, including the work of Goffman. And please know that your work in Goffman seems to align really well in that we support each other. The claims that Goffman makes are the same types of claims that I think you're making here. And let me just show you why. Okay, so this is from Goffman's excellent paper on felicity conditions. If you know how to make this line go away, then please do, but otherwise we'll carry on with the line. Okay, so this is Goffman's really excellent paper, where he's setting out the foundations of microanalysis in anthropology and sociology. And the key thing here is that the participants in a face-to-face social interaction have a shared understanding of what's going on. And that context is produced through that interaction, through talk, through gesture, and so on. The second point from the felicity conditions paper, I think is equally important, and I feel this is the crux of the argument in terms of how this links up with microanalysis. Okay, so there's a few key phrases here from Goffman's work I want to tease out. One is the idea that the data is systematically represented. Okay, so it's a systematic kind of coherent set of data. that it's objective. We can capture it, and that it's capturable, but also that we can work back the way from that data to its underlying presuppositions, etc. So what it's suggesting there is that there's a coherence between the various, let's say, streams of data, the various modes of analysis. They're not ad hoc. So when I'm gesturing to you just now, my gestures are intimately connected to what I'm saying and the context in which I'm saying it. They're, so there's this comes back to that point about validity. Fidelity. Thank you. There's a data fidelity. So what it suggests to me is that it's valid to start looking at those different data streams in multimodal analysis and make assumptions that they are inherently connected in a logical and valid way. So it seems to me that that's the basis for validation claims involving multimodal analysis. I think that's an insight that Goffman brings. Now this doesn't work. Okay, go ahead. Can you make it go on? Yes. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, now we need to go one on. There, thank you. Not back one. Thanks. Okay, and just to reinforce that point, this is work by linguistic anthropologists such as Charles Goodwin and similar work in gesture studies, where they're not only talking about the coherence of multimodal communication, but how that's intrinsically linked to the cognitive processes. So that's the final piece of the jigsaw. And they're linking, here Goodwin's talking about the work of McNeill, who works on gesture studies. He's the sort of one of the founding figures of modern gesture studies. And for McNeill, again, gesture is intimately linked to cognition. So everything ties up in a sort of coherent manner, and it's valid to then consider these things as connected in that kind of way. Okay, so I would say that's foundations. And for me, those foundations are really, I would argue that they're strong. That there's a strong basis in which to consider those different streams of multimodal analysis as intimately logically connected. So I'm just going to provide a couple of examples from my work and to reflect on some of these things. And those examples draw on the theme of the view from afar, as well as the close-up analysis that I've been talking about. So can we have the next slide? Yeah. Okay, so this is actually a well-traveled test item originally developed by Stats Canada. It's an open public release item. The website's there if you want to check it out any further. The fuel gauge, or the gas gauge. I had the opportunity to spend some time doing ethnographic fieldwork, observing large-scale assessments in Mongolia, the LAMP project that UNESCO Statistics ran. And I spent time hanging out in testing situations, observing what's going on, how are people engaging, how are they responding and interacting with the test items, and then interviewing people afterwards about particular items and about their feelings about the process, etc. A lot of interesting stuff came from there. This is one particular item. So on the left you have the item as it appears in the test booklet with a question, and it asks them to calculate. It tells them how much fuel is in the tank when it's full, and asks them to calculate how much is left in this particular picture. And on the right here you have a photograph from a motorbike in Mongolia, a little bit of ecological validity and so on, and you can see on that there's a fuel gauge. It's inverted slightly in comparison with the one in the item, but it essentially looks very similar. There are some small differences. There's a red mark at the bottom, which is, I guess, a clue to red is danger, and semiotics, etc. There's no red on this one. Of course, one of the difficulties is that in Mongolia, E and F don't stand for empty and full. When you look at the Mongolian words for empty and full, they don't match up. So there's a problem. So what we found here was that there was gender-based diff. So the women taking the test item were performing less well than men taking the test item. So the psychometric properties of the items revealed that. And so we went back and we started to look at the ethnographic material for why that might be. And the obvious thing, in a way, was there was a couple of points. Women tend not to drive motorbikes. They tend to be passengers on motorbikes, so they tend not to do the fuel filling, etc. At an individual level, that might not be important, but when we look across the whole sample, it begins to show up as diff. The other point was that women are less likely to be speak English, and so they wouldn't be familiar with the empty and full words. And so we looked at that as a plausible explanation. It might not be the final explanation, but a plausible explanation for why there was diff in this particular item. Can we go to the next slide? We've missed one. Oh, sorry, no, we haven't. Sorry, mind going back? Thanks. Here's a bit of text, which is this is think aloud, uninvited think aloud. So the person just happened to talk through it. Sometimes people do that when they're doing tests. And this is the respondent talking through a woman talking through as she's doing the item. And as you can see specifically, she calculated it the wrong way around. And when we looked through the answer, we found that some people had assumed that it was the other way around, empty was full and full was empty. We just, for some reason, they thought it was that way around. And this person's kind of, because she's talking out loud, that there's a tester or an interviewer who kind of captures that and say, hey, by the way, no, it's the other way around. And she corrects herself and fixes it. But in most situations, they wouldn't have had the opportunity, they wouldn't have been thinking out loud, and they would have just got the wrong answer if they had done that. And that's, I think, for us, that's an explanation. Okay, thanks. Now, I had the opportunity to do some lab-based research using the same item. And one of the things I did was I looked very carefully at using eye tracker data. When people are completing the item, what are they doing? In my initial look through the videos, about the eye tracker videos, I didn't notice anything except them having a quick glance at the item, at the stimulus, and the question, and then doing a calculation. But when I slowed it down, frame by frame, literally frame by frame, if you just watched it, you wouldn't see it. It's just not, it's too quick for the human eye to pick up. But when I showed it frame by frame, what I found was that they have these microsaccades where they look at the E and the F. And this is the evidence from it. This is actually the screenshots from the eye tracker. So you can see that the E and the F are actually critical to their effective completion of the task, even in contexts where they speak English and they know it. So again, it's another layer of micro-validation evidence in terms of what's going on. And so eye tracker with talk, with contextualized explanation, can add a really important layer of evidence. I know some of you are already kind of converted to that view or promoting that view, which again I think is, to come back to the earlier point, is part of a kind of coherent discussion. Okay, a second example I want to show, this is not from Mongolia anymore, this is from my ethnographic observations in Slovenia of the OECD PIAC assessment. PIAC loops, it's a standardized large-scale assessment looking, in this case, computer-based, looking at adults' literacy, numeracy, and problem solving. And this is a transcript from a woman who is doing the PIAC assessment and is having some problems. And it seems to me this is process data. Yeah. So what can we take from this process data? And what's going on here, I think, needs to be contextually understood. Now, I've looked at log file data from PIAC, and I've looked at my data from PIAC. And log files are very interesting. Response times are very interesting. But what they don't capture is what's going on other than the clicks and the keystrokes. In this case, there are no clicks and no keystrokes going on. But there's some really important data being collected. In this case, it's about the relationship between the woman taking the test and her responsibilities to her young child. Okay, so how many of the adults taking PIAC assessments in the afternoons after school time are having to interact with young children? A lot of women are having to do that. And in the observations that I did in Slovenia, we found that frequently. Men and women having to interact with children, particularly around meal times, and curtailing the performance of the test because it clashed with meal times. So there's important feedback there in terms of validity. When is the best time to do the feedback assessment? What kind of things might interfere with it, etc. So it's again, a feedback loop about the validity of the assessment process. What would it mean to see that particular assessment from the perspective of an eye tracker? Well, I created an animation to try to look at that. Hopefully we can show the animation. Did you do the alt tab?
Yes.
We tried this so many times. Can you go back and alt tab again? Close this one. H when it works straight away, so it's something not right. Close that one and then try again. Okay. Thank you. Okay, skip it. I do that. I did say I really want to skip it, but I can't skip it. Can we go back to the presentation? I'll just skip it. For those people who, if you just go back to the presentation, that's great. You can go ahead first. No, that's good. Okay. So on the presentation slides, you can follow the link and you can see the animation if you want to. The animation is trying to tease out what more, let's say, eye tracking data might capture about the ecology of that situation, what it's feeding back to the people who use the test and administer the test around issues about eligibility. Okay, so now I just want to sum up. How long do I have left?
Yeah, you got 20 minutes.
20 minutes, great. Okay, so what I want to do is sum up, and I want to explore some of the ongoing arguments about process data and validity and validation. And in particular, I'm going to look at some of the debate that I've had with Professor Paul Newton, who's a professor at Oxford in the UK. Last year, I published a paper which I'm going to talk about around talk and gesture and process data. Talk and gesture as process data. And so Paul and a number of other people wrote responses to that paper. And so I want to engage with that debate and to look at some implications. So in doing that, I think I just want to sum up some of the earlier points, which is that the examples I've shown you are examples of testing in the wild. But I think a lot of the validation questions which I've been looking at this week, for example, are about not what happens downstream, but what happens upstream in test development processes and assessment that's embedded in learning, multimodal learning. Because it seems to me that one of the major shifts which has taken place in validation practice with the shift towards multimodal next generation assessments is that a lot of the validation work has to happen upstream, so it's front-loaded. And I think that's one of the key differences. By the time that complex computer-based assessments make it into the wild, a lot of the stuff is hidden. It's hidden in design structures and frameworks, it's hidden in algorithms, it's hidden in assumptions that we make about how we value certain kinds of data. So, for example, how important are response times in the performance of this item, etc. How do we value certain kinds of talk? When we start looking at multimodal analysis, there's a whole set of really important validity questions that we need to capture, I think, in that process. So I think what I'm going to say now relates to that as much as it does towards assessment in the field and how it helps to process data, helps to validate what we do. Okay, so Paul Newton has described a distinction between what he sees as micro-validation and macro-validation. And I think what I'm talking about today very much relates to the micro processes in validation. And this is how he views that. So okay, so he's talking about how we can capture process data in interaction. And he describes that as low-level evidence. When he's talking about low-level evidence, he's not trying to be disparaging. He's not trying to say it's not important. But what he's saying is that it's the low-level evidence that helps to contribute to a higher level validity judgment. Okay. And this is from the paper where he comments on my recent paper in talk and gesture as process data, and he says this. I'll just let you read through that. Okay, so there's a few key points here. He's recognizing the significance of talk and gesture, and actually you can expand that to other analysis, textual analysis, keystrokes, whatever, eye tracking, whatever you want to use. Some people use heart rate monitors. There's a whole lot of stuff. People have bands that they wear around their heads to capture, cognitive processes, etc. So that's all part of this response process evidence. And he argues, following me, that this is essentially being neglected in validation research. So it's hugely important in next generation designs, but it's hugely neglected in terms of validation. And then we have to somehow bridge that gap. We have to take validation questions and recontextualize them within current practice. So I see that as important. But I think what I would say here is he uses the phrase neglected in routine validation research. Okay, what I would like to argue is that we're not talking about routine validation research. We're talking about contexts of rapid improvisation and innovation. I think that's really key. So what does it mean then to be doing innovative work, to be improvising? And the work which I've seen in the last couple of weeks here, there's a lot of improvisation. It's well-informed, well-meaning improvisation. It's with experts trying to solve problems in assessment. But we don't have off-the-shelf validation practices to match up with that, not yet. And so how do we then build it into it? Okay, the next slide, please. All right. So this is one of his concluding points. Okay, so, and I think I would agree with him when he says that evidence from micro-validation research is harder to integrate, and our profession would benefit greatly from case studies of how this can be achieved. Where I would disagree with Newton is that in a lot of the work we do now, process data is performance data. So it's not an optional extra. And I think, we had these debates with various people about these kind of themes. And there is an argument that says, well, yeah, it's fine. We know we can capture it. But really, it's not the main thing we're looking at. Increasingly, it is the main thing we're looking at. There are multiple data points in process data. Design interpretations of process data are built into what we regard as a certain performance. So we have no choice. We have to think about how the validity questions about how we're using process data as performance data. So I think my response to Paul and I guess to you guys is, don't ask me. I mean, I'm very happy to help, but over to you, because if you're serious about the kind of validation question which is posed at the start, then it's up to you to think about how you build in validation practices into innovative improvisations. And I think that's certainly one of the challenges. Thanks. Okay, so my response to, just to sum up my response to Newton then, we have to recognize the centrality of fine-grained multimodal data in next-generation assessments. And that argument has already been well established. There's enough literature now which absolutely recognizes the nature of the central nature of that data. It's no longer a passing, peripheral theme. It's central to what we do. Secondly, we need to validate the use of process data as performance data, particularly as we get into ML and artificial intelligence. It's absolutely essential we do that. We do that as we're building the components, as we're making decisions about which algorithms to use, the structures that we establish, etc. That's when it has to happen, the upstream work. And I think, and so there are requirements for what Newton calls process scrutiny, for us to reflect in the way that anthropologists reflect, that reflexivity about what is it we're doing, what are the decisions we're making about how we frame and capture knowledge, and are those valid? We're dealing with lots of new objects and data uses, new algorithms, software, hardware, and so on. An example there would be the face reader software that captures emotions. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the validity literature on the use of face reader. I haven't. I use face reader, and I'm going to be using it in the field just in a couple of months. So I thought I should check. I should ask Naldus, what data is there about the validity of face reader across cultures and across groups? I don't know the answer yet. I need to do that. That's my due diligence. I need to do that before I use it and make conclusions based on that data. Every time we use a new piece of software, data capture, we should be asking these questions. I don't know the answer for the data knowledge face reader, but what I do know is that the research more generally on emotion recognition suggests that there are equity issues, representational issues around capturing that data across different racial groups. Okay, so Knowledge Face Reader has an option you can click for East Asian faces. It doesn't have one on the software we've been using for African faces. The literature on motion recognition suggests that it discriminates against African faces. So we need to know that stuff, and we need to know how it's impacting on the data that we then feed into other algorithms, etc. It's really important, I think. Okay, can we have the last slide? Okay, so just to conclude then, opportunities, challenges, obligations. Just by chance, there was something on Twitter about this this talk by Ali Ramini, where he was looking at rapid advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and he made a very heartfelt plea. It's on YouTube. You can check it out if you type in the details of this. You'll see it on YouTube. He makes a very heartfelt plea for people working in machine learning to understand the performance and validity characteristics of the algorithms that they develop. And he argues that the pace of innovation, what he describes as jumping ahead, rapid jumps ahead, means that people are so excited by these moves, they don't often take the time to step back and say, okay, we've done that, but let's look at its characteristics. And I know from talking with colleagues, that is an integral part of good science and a good work in ML. I know it's part of it, but it might also get a bit forgotten. And we need to be accountable in terms of doing that stuff, but also showing the public and other professionals that we are accountable and that it is being done. So I like I can't comment on the substance of his work on algorithms, etc. But I like the substance of his heartfelt plea that we need to remember to do that work. And I think it relates to the kind of work that's going on here. I think we have new obligations then in terms of validity practice, new types of data. We have obligations. I think there's two sets of obligations that we need to sort of think about. One is obligations to professional communities of practice. And I think we do quite a lot of that stuff, or you do quite a lot of that stuff through publications. So when you publish a paper, there's a reviewer process. The reviewers will interrogate your data. They will ask questions. So they're asking essentially validity-related questions. They're not asking the full range of validity-related questions, but they're asking some. So we have accountability to other professionals, other people working in testing context. But I think we also have accountability to the public. And one of the things that I think I've noticed in the last couple of weeks here is the level of expertise is immense. They're really incredibly strong people that are working on this stuff. But the gap between your knowledge and public knowledge is enormous. It's just huge. And that has implications, because one of the tests for validity is, are the public happy with it? Are they convinced about its appropriateness, about its consequences, about its design, and so on? And the answer to that one is almost certainly no at the moment. The public fear technology, they fear algorithms, they fear artificial intelligence. And I don't know about in the States, and I know there's a quit testing movement, etc. But this kind of stuff will fuel a quit testing movement if people are not convinced that you've done your due diligence and that you know that these things work, that the performance of these things is equitable, etc. There are many cases of this in recent months where test developers haven't thought through these questions. I know there's examples in the UK recently where they've rolled out incredibly expensive test development projects. They've rolled them out into schools. They haven't done the due diligence. They haven't either tested the validity in the school, in some cases, or provided the validity trail so that they can be accountable to the public. And then ministers of education are asked, why are we using this test? It's damaging children. Now they're pretty sure it's not damaging children, and most likely it's not, but the public think it is. And they might have to pull the test as a result. And the minister's under pressure as a result. Now that's easily avoidable. If you have faith in the test that you're developing, provide a paper trail, provide a validity trail, to be able to show end users and the public that that's happening. So engagement with the public on these things, I think, is really critical as part of the validity process. Okay, coming to an end now. One of the things I posed at the beginning, questions I posed at the beginning, was about routine versus improvised practice. It seems to me, yes, you're going through rapid innovations, and there's lots of improvisation going on in that. But isn't that normal scientific work? In normal scientific work, we have tests of validity. When you do an experiment, you're accountable to yourselves and to your fellow professionals to show that this experiment was conducted in a valid way and that the interpretations of the experiment are valid. So I don't think the fact that we are going through this rapid period of innovation allows us to get off and say, well, we'll do the validation later after we've done the improvisation. It seems to me that valid scientific work requires that built in. Okay, I've come to the end. Thanks very much.